Hey guys, what's up? Mr. Newell coming at you from my apartment, Stymie World headquarters. So welcome. Hope everybody is safe and happy and healthy and all that good stuff. Sorry for wearing the hat, but there's an overhead light, and if I take this off, you're going to be blinded by some glare, and I don't want that. But in case you do want to see it, maybe pause the video, get your sunglasses out, all right? Because there's a lot of glare coming off my head right about now. So I'm going to put this back on. Anyway, we are going to go over chapter 28 right here, government and market failure. So if you haven't done so yet, you might want to print this out. It is on Google Classroom as an attachment. So as you can see here, we have Uncle Sam, and he is drowning in debt. And right now, as of this recording, we are about $23.6 trillion in national debt. And that's going to get worse. They're talking about $1 trillion stimulus package for this economy, which is going straight into the ground. So hopefully that will help curtail it, and hopefully we can get through this without too much collateral damage. But anyway, there's a lot of extraneous information in this, and I'm going to try to avoid a lot of it. I'm just going to try to give you the main things that you need to know, which obviously I never want to waste your time, so we're not going to start now with distance learning. So let's get right into it so we can get over with it. First thing you need to know here is about the difference between private goods and public goods. Okay, private goods and public goods. It's pretty simple. With a private good, there's rivalry in consumption and there's excludability. So these gummy bears right here, they're a private good. All right, I can consume them and keep you out from consuming them because we are, social distancing. So I can eat my gummy bears and you can't have any. I can exclude you from eating them. They're a private good. Public goods, however, you cannot be excluded from. Parks are public goods. They may have rules and regulations where you can't go at night, but pretty much everyone can use them. National defense is a public good. You get the benefit of it whether or not you're paying for it or not. So even people who are, say, homeless and don't have a job and are not contributing any money via taxes, they are still protected by national defense. So we have a term here that you do need to know on this sheet, free rider problem. The free rider is when people who don't pay for public goods get the benefit from them. So everyone's probably driven on 22 before. 22 is a state highway, paid for mostly by New Jersey taxes. However, there are people from other states driving on the highway. You see New York license plates all the time, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, whatever. They haven't directly paid for that highway, but they're using it. They're considered free riders. This is not too big of a problem, but you just need to be aware of the term because you will see it. So they say next here, optimal quantity of a public good. This is just where supply and demand meet. Now, our supply curve and our demand curves are collective, so we're basically summing the demand of the public and putting it together and then throwing it in with the supply curve, and we get the optimal quantity. Not a big deal. We don't have to worry about that. This page right here, don't even worry about it. This right here, these two graphs are the most important graphs. We will see them over and over again in the AP problems that we start doing next week. Okay, you have a negative externality and a positive externality. The title of the chapter was Government and Market Failure. Sometimes governments fail to make the optimal amount of a product. So when that happens, we get what we call an externality. An externality is when we overproduce something or we underproduce something. So that externality is actually what causes the overproduction or the underproduction. So when we look at these graphs, QO on these graphs is the optimal level. QE is where we're currently producing. So in the first graph, the negative externalities graph, okay? Negative externalities, the optimal quantity is less than what the actual quantity being produced is. That means we're overproducing. So I wrote in that summary that you're supposed to do for your first assignment, and if you haven't done it, do it. All right, please do it. It's very easy. Read what I wrote and just watch the video that I attached. Anyway, negative externality is an overallocation. The market's making too much of something. So in this over allocation of resources, we have to tax, right? We tax. That tax allows us to bring back the quantity, right? Because a tax, as we can see on here, we have a supply curve and a supply curve with a tax. The supply curve with the tax is to the left, right? It is reduced the supply curve, right? The tax makes it more expensive to produce, so supply decreases. When we decrease that supply, we decrease the equilibrium quantity from QE to QO. That gets us to the optimal quantity. So think of a factory that pollutes, okay? That's a negative externality. It's affecting other people other than, just the business itself. It affects, a lot of people. So it's a negative externality. Why do we have that negative externality? Well, they're polluting. Why are they polluting? They don't want to pay for the proper disposal of their waste. Okay, so they don't pay for that proper disposal of their waste. That is one less cost they're incurring. Their supply then is greater than it should be, because instead of paying for the proper disposal of the waste, they're just dumping it in the river. All right, so who gets the brunt of that negative externality? Well, if you enjoy that river for swimming or boating, or if that river is used for drinking water, well, a lot of people are suffering because that firm is polluting. So it's a negative externality, and we're going to solve that by either putting laws in place or taxes, okay? And what that does, like I've said, is it makes it more expensive to produce. It shifts my supply curve to the left and brings my quantity from QE to QO. And remember, QO is optimal. That's what society wants. Okay, the next, positive externality. Positive externality is an under allocation. It means we're not producing enough. The optimal quantity is greater than what society is currently producing. So QO is greater than QE. The economy is currently at QE. We want to get to QO. There are benefits to whatever this is that we're not fully recognizing. So positive externalities, the best way to fix them are to subsidize, okay? In this case, we are subsidizing the consumer. We are increasing the demand or shifting it to the right. Now it has a DT on here. That should be a DS for subsidy. So in this case, we're subsidizing the consumer. The demand curve is shifting to the right, an increase in demand, and the quantity is shifting to the right. Now, what is an example of a positive externality? Well, a positive externality would be public education, okay? So if the government didn't step in and fund public education, there wouldn't be enough of it, okay? Public education is shown to be a good thing, education in general. So the government funds it. Why? Because we want our citizens to be well educated. Citizens who are more educated are more productive, and that benefits society as a whole. So if we didn't subsidize education, there wouldn't be enough of it. Now, we can subsidize the producer as well as the consumer. A subsidy to the producer would obviously shift the supply curve to the right as opposed to the demand curve, okay? So it's very simple. If you remember the two words, not puns. N is for negative externality, which is an overallocation of resources. NO, overallocation, that's solved by taxation, okay? Puns, okay? Puns. Positive externality, that's an underallocation. UN, under, all right, I know it's two letters, whoa, crazy. Underallocation, that's solved by subsidizing, okay? Not puns. You remember that? You're going to be in good shape. Now, I went out to Staples and I bought this awesome whiteboard here. So I just want to help you in the graphing, which we're going to do next week. Okay, so I'm going to set up a graph here real quick. And we have our axes. And then what we want to do okay, now that we have our axis on here, is just draw our supply and demand curve in. And if I can label them correctly. All right, so there's our demand, there's our supply, okay? Demand, supply, that is our basic graph. Now, this quantity right here is where the market is currently producing, okay? That's the market quantity right there. So when you do these graphs, always start off with just a supply and demand curve and label that your market quantity. Now, the graph is going to, or the problem is going to give you a description, and you have to figure out whether it's a positive externality or negative externality. And once you do that, okay, what you should do on your graph is make a mark, okay, either here or here. So if it's a negative externality, right, the market is producing too much, and optimal would be back here, okay? If this is a positive externality, the market is producing not enough. We're under allocating. The market is under allocating, and the ideal quantity is going to be out here. So let's do a negative externality first. So a negative externality, okay, would be when the market is over allocating. So this right here should be our supply curve, okay? This is the quantity optimal. So I drew in a second supply curve, okay, and I put quantity optimal. Now, that supply curve needs to have a T next to it, okay? Why a T? Because that is the supply curve with the tax. Our original supply curve meant that the market is producing too much. So when we put in our new supply curve to the left, that should have the tax on it. So the supplier has been taxed. The supply curve shifted to the left because now it's more expensive to produce. The new equilibrium is where we're optimal. So this is a negative externality here, all right? One more thing, and then that'll be it. Let's draw another graph. Same thing, start off with supply and demand. That's negative. Let's do a positive now. Okay, so this quantity is the market quantity where supply and demand meet right there. It's going to be a positive externality. So what do we have to do? We have to say that a positive externality is an under allocation. So this market is not producing enough. So right here is where we want to be. Okay, so we can do one of two things. We can subsidize the producer, which would increase the supply curve, or we can subsidize the consumer, which is going to increase the demand curve. Let's subsidize the producer here, okay? So we're going to subsidize the producer. My supply curve is going to, oh, I did it again. I labeled them wrong. I'm getting rusty. This is demand, that's supply, okay? We're going to shift the supply curve to the right this time, okay? There's the new supply curve. This is the supply curve with the subsidy. And my new quantity, my optimal quantity, is going to be right here. All right, I know these are messy. I got to get used to using a whiteboard. I got to get used to this whole video thing. I apologize. But bottom line for today, not puns, okay? Not puns. What that means is if you have a negative externality, it's an overallocation of resources. We're making too much. Resources are being distributed in a way that is not best for society. Too many resources are going to this one thing. So we have to stop that. We have to reduce that. And we do that by taxation. So that firm that was polluting, we tax them, brings their costs up. Their output comes back to a level that's optimal for society. In a positive externality, a firm is not producing enough. Society wants more of this product. So it's a positive externality. It's an underallocation. We're going to subsidize them, increase the supply, bringing us to the optimal quantity. Or in a positive externality, we could also subsidize the consumer, increase their demand. Now, positive externality, a lot of what's going on right now, we are under allocating our resources to producing coronavirus tests. So real life application here. The government's throwing a lot of money in to get these tests ready so people can get tested. So there's the optimal quantity right now is far less the optimal quantity is far more than what we're currently producing. So we have to subsidize to get that quantity. So we're subsidizing a lot of test producers so they can quick get the test to market, increase the supply, and get us to the optimal quantity. Because right now we're not even close. So hopefully here within the next week or so, the tests, production of the tests get ramped up, and we can eliminate this under allocation of resources. So anyway, that's the guts of this chapter. Next week, we will start working on some problems. But main thing is know these two graphs. You will see them again and again and again. We have lots of problems to do next week with these two graphs, and we're going to add to it as well. So hope everybody's well. Have a great weekend, and I'll catch you next week. Bye.